In this map, we're going to look at the physical regions of Eastern Europe and not the non-Russia part of Eastern Europe. And what we're going to look at is the mountains and the plains. And the mountains are brown in this map and the plains are green, just so you kind of have a good idea of what's going on here. But the mountains that are in the Balkan Peninsula, which the Balkan Peninsula is, I'll circle with purple, is kind of this whole area that goes out into the water. Okay, and that's the Balkan Peninsula, but what are the mountains within there? And so the mountains include the Dinaric Alps, and the Dinaric Alps are right in through here. So these ones are the Dinaric Alps. That's at number 1, and number 1 right here. Okay, then the Balkan Mountains run along the bottom right here, and so I'll try and pick a color that you can see a little better, maybe red. Okay, the Balkan Mountains go in here, and so that's number 2. And then number 3 is some other mountains that are up to the north of those two southern mountains, and those would be the Transylvanian Alps and the Carpathian Mountains. And the Transylvanian Alps run in here. Okay, so these are number 3, and then they are kind of connected to the Carpathian Mountains that run all the way through here. So that's number 4. And so number 3 and number 4. And I know it's kind of hard to see on this map, but if you have questions, please ask them in class. The plains on this map are green, and so you can see up in the top, this is that extension of what we already talked about, the biggest area of flat land on Earth. The northern European plain also runs through Eastern Europe, and the Great Hungarian Plain also exists, and that's in Hungary, and that is right in the middle of all of these mountains. There's a nice little area of flat land in there. It's stuck right in there. Now, the lakes and the hills were in this air region were all formed by glaciers. During the Ice Age, there was glaciers on top of all of the land up to 2 miles thick. As those glaciers started to move around and recede, it weathered the land, it broke it apart, it eroded the land, it moved it around, and then it also deposited the land. And so with deposition, it left it sitting there. And so that kind of formed what the land looks like today. Now we need to look at the physical regions of Russia. In Russia, there's a lot of different physical regions, but we're going to talk about just some major, really large ones. The Asian part of Russia, basically the entire part in Asia, is called Siberia. And Siberia is an enormous, enormous area, and it's really difficult to live in. It's very cold, very flat, very dry, just not a great place to be living in. Right next to the Siberia are the set of mountains that separates Europe from Asia, and they're right in the middle of Russia. So part of Russia is in Europe and part of it's in Asia. These are called the Ural Mountains. Okay, and the Ural Mountains are kind of the border between Europe and Asia. So Ural Mountains, we'll call Siberia number 1. That's number 1. And then number 2 is Ural Mountains. We'll put that right here. That's number 2. Okay, and so it separates Asia from Europe, and it runs right down the middle of the western part of Europe, or of Russia, I mean, and then all throughout Russia in different areas, some in Siberia and other things like that, there are plains and plateau areas throughout the entire thing. There are also a lot, because it's such a huge country, there are a lot of rivers, really large rivers, and then you can also see nice amount of coastline, so it touches the ocean all the way along the northern part and along the eastern part. But the big problem with it is that there isn't a whole lot of ports. Okay, there are not a lot of ports and harbors and deep areas because most of the ocean that's touching Russia is in the north. It's the Arctic Ocean, and that Arctic Ocean is very cold, and so that's inhibited most of the year by ice, not allowing you to get your ships out there and to other locations where it's actually a useful port. Okay, out in the middle of Siberia, there's also a lake named Lake Baikal, and Lake Baikal right here is the name of it, is a very, very deep lake. It's a freshwater lake, and it runs more than 1 mile deep. It's extremely deep, and so it holds about 20% of the world's fresh water. This one lake holds more fresh water than all of the Great Lakes in the United States combined. As I said before, Russia is special because it's just huge. It's enormous. Inside of Russia, there are 11 time zones. The entire world is only 24 time zones. So really, Russia stretches over almost half of the entire world. It touches almost half of the time zones. If they were to hit 12, it would have been exactly half. It stretches over the course of 2 continents. It's a major part of Europe and a huge part of Asia as well. The land area is about 1/8 of all the land area on the earth, and Russia, if you include Alaska and Hawaii, is about it's about 2 times the size of the United States. I know you can't see that down here, but 2 times the size of the United States. Okay, so really, really big. Now to look at the climates. In Eastern Europe, there's 2 kind of different sets of climates. In the north, they have continental cool summers, kind of like Minnesota, in the countries of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, in that kind of northern part. If we look at it on this map, it's over here in the left corner here. That's kind of the area that has the same kind of weather as we do, or maybe southern Canada, maybe a little colder than Minnesota. In the southern part, though, they're pretty close to the Mediterranean Sea, and because they're close to the Mediterranean Sea, they have a more humid subtropical or Mediterranean type of climate. So it's these dry summers and rainy winters, and the temperature is kind of regulated by being close to that big body of water. In Russia, however, there are most of Russia is subarctic, and that would be kind of this, I guess, lighter color right here. Okay, but most of it is subarctic, but then there are also small areas of tundra up in the north part. That's kind of the light pink right there. Okay, and that tundra is that cold, dry, treeless land covered in snow most of the year, all that kind of stuff. Now, all throughout Siberia, which is this entire, like, 2/3, 3/4 of Russia, there's a really extreme climate. Their winters are very long, their winters are very cold, and also very dry. In European Russia, however, that's where the continental cool summer climate is, like we have here in Minnesota, and that's where most of the people live, because it's the best climate that Russia has. Depending on where you are in Eastern Europe, being a farmer presents different challenges based on your location. In the north, you have better land, but a worse climate. In the south, you have better climate, but worse land. So it's kind of difficult no matter where you're at, but there's a positive for each side. There are very dry summers and wet winters all throughout Eastern Europe, but the good thing about it is in the winter, the snow and ice that's up on the hills from these wet winters, it melts and it comes down throughout the streams, and it brings water into the farms. So those dry summers, you still get water for your crops coming from the ice melt on the hills. In the northern European plain, however, where the climate's not as good but the land is really good, mechanized farming, using machinery, farming with machines on these huge flat areas where it's really easy to pick your crops and plant your seeds and do the plowing and all that kind of stuff. It is a lot easier on the northern European plain, and so since it's so easy, they have these huge fields of grains like wheat and rye, and these giant farms up in the north versus smaller farms in the south with things like citrus and olives and grapes. So you can grow a lot more variety of crops in the south, but there's less room to do it, and it's harder to do because you can't use as many large machines. If we look at the natural resources in this area in Ukraine and Poland, in that Eastern European area, two of the larger countries in that area, there is iron ore and coal, and having a lot of iron and a lot of coal attracts factories, because those are some things that you need to make a whole lot of different products like steel and other things like that. Eastern Europe, though, doesn't have like any oil, and so they need to import basically all of their oil from Russia. And so these countries have become really dependent on Russia to be able to get their oil. Russia, however, has a whole lot of natural resources. Russia has very rich mineral and energy resources. They have 1/3 of all the world's coal is located in Russia, as well as oil that is located in Siberia, and the coal is located mostly in Siberia as well. You can also find metals like iron, gold, cobalt, nickel, platinum, very valuable metals within parts of Russia. And then because it's so large, there's large amounts of forests, which creates timber, remember wood from the trees, as well as fish, and then the giant rivers create a lot of hydroelectric energy. Now, what they need to do in order to make that work for them, all of this is it's stuck out in Siberia. They need to have a really extensive, big transportation system to move it to the places where it can actually be sold and or used. So with most of the resources in Russia being in Siberia, there are these huge areas of harsh land, terrible land between the raw materials and the factories, which means that they need a really, really good set of transportation. And so the problem is in Russia, the roads are just terrible. And so they're really poorly taken care of. And so some people actually find that the frozen rivers and lakes are easier to drive on than the roads that are created for driving. So it's a really bad situation there. And then they move their oil and gas through underground pipelines that they have set up. And then they also have just a huge railroad network that they've created in 1905 called the Trans-Siberian Railroad. It goes all the way from Moscow in Europe all the way out to the Pacific Ocean. And it was, set up to encourage industry to be able to move and companies and things like that, but also to be able to move the military quickly to deal with issues both in Europe and in the Asian side of Russia. There are also environmental issues that play a factor in life in Eastern Europe, and one of the huge ones is nuclear plant explosions. In 1986, in Chernobyl in Ukraine, the nuclear plant there exploded. And when there was an explosion there, radiation got into the air and into the soil and into the water and everything, and it spread out and it's at very deadly levels in many of the cities close by. And so people started to get sick, people started to die, so everyone just left the area and left it completely behind and left everything that they had behind and all that kind of stuff. And so because they were forced to leave, they left these dead cities sitting there. So it's really eerie and weird. People come kind of go and visit them and check them out, and it's just kind of like these ghost towns. There's absolutely nothing in the area. And so that's one of the things, and for 20 years later, it was still radiation at too high levels for people to live there. So people are still not living in that area because the radiation level is so high. Also, from all the coal burning that they do in their factories and in different plants and stuff like that, acid rain has become a problem because of the pollution that gets up into the air and into the rain. And it's destroying a lot of the plant life. You can see down in the bottom corner picture of some trees that have been dealing with acid rain, and so that's a really nasty deal. And then the other things that the non-Russian communities or countries are dealing with is that if they want to join the EU, which they've now been invited to join the European Union, they have to make their factories more environmentally safe. And so for the very first time, the environment is being addressed in Eastern Europe, and they're having to deal with it no matter what. A hallmark of Eastern Europe and Russia is also their religious diversity. They have a lot of different Christian people and non-Christians, but mostly in the northernmost countries, the smallest area, there's a lot of Protestant people. However, if you put it all the rest together, then the western half is mostly Roman Catholic and the eastern half is the Eastern Orthodox. That's where that schism happened between the Patriarch Constantinople and the Patriarch of Rome, or the Pope. And so that's where that religion split into two, and so now those two are the major religions in the area. The largest non-Christian group in the area are Muslims, and there are many pockets in the south, including Albania, Kosovo, Bosnia, and the Crimean Peninsula of the Ukraine, have a large population of Muslim people. The Eastern Europe used to have the most Jewish people of anywhere in the world, the highest concentration. However, the Soviets and the Nazis stopped that because the Soviets discouraged religion. They didn't like religion at all. And then the Nazis, through the Holocaust and killing of all of the Jewish people that they could get their hands on in those countries, started to drive them to leave that area. Okay, because of that Soviet discouragement of religion and that they didn't like the idea of religion, a lot of people still claim that they have no faith in any religion. Talk a little bit more about the people of Russia, where they're located and things like that. The people of Russia, there are about 140 million people in Russia, so a little bit less than half of the people in America. Most of the people in Russia live in the European part. As you can see just by this map down here, all of the red and orange basically is in that Western European part. Okay, there are very few people living in Siberia. On average, it's about 20 people living in each square mile. So that's a 1 mile wide by 1 mile long box, and only 20 people live in that. It's 10 blocks by 10 blocks, a total of 20 people. That's really a sparse population. The largest city is Moscow, and Moscow has about 10 million people. And it's really the largest city in all of Eastern Europe, as well as the largest city in Russia. And in Russia, about 80% of the people are Russian-speaking Slavs, and Slavs are the very first people to come, as we'll learn in the history section, into and establish Russia. And the other 20% of people are one of 99 other ethnic groups that live in Russia. But what they find is it's really hard to maintain their unique identities because of that really, really large percentage of Russian-speaking Slavs who are in the area.